Welcome to another crash course in Warframe. Today's feature will evolve around the lovely Miss Saryn, who you may or may not have recognized as I've dressed her up to look like Jessica Rabbit. Huh? Yeah. There are few elemental-based frames in the collection, Volt being electricity, Ember being fire, and now Saryn covering poisons. And even though she has a decoy-style ability, she's still pretty much all offense, with two of her abilities bringing some interesting mechanics to the game. First things first, Saryn is a little slow, and we can see that they try to balance that out with stats, with her health being pretty high, as well as her armor, and then with mid-range level shield and power max. This all falls in line with her abilities being primarily offensive, and almost reminds me of how warlocks are typically represented in most MMOs. You know, with them being slightly more durable than other cloth wearers with access to several damage over time abilities. And wouldn't you know, Saryn has one of her own. It's called Venom, and it is one of those abilities that could be amazing if you play your cards right. The basic gist is you master one key and a spore attaches itself to the enemy. As you can see, it slowly does damage over time at the rate of 24 damage per second at rank 3, which could of course change in the future. Now, if you're throwing this on a bunch of enemies in a group, you're pretty much doing it wrong. See, the next step after one of these spores attaches itself is to then shoot it. It will then explode, doing damage to the thing it's attached to, and if there's anybody in the vicinity, it'll attach a new spore to them. Now your 25 energy ability is paying off. The problem is that the splash damage to make this happen seems a bit small. I mean, it's hard to tell since nothing will stand still, which obviously brings us to the other issue, which is it's not easy to shoot these things while the movement these enemies tend to do. This is why I decided to equip Saryn with a shotgun, guaranteed to hit in most cases. The other use, and this is again back to the Warlock thing, is just to keep it rolling while you're fighting bosses the same way you keep dots rolling in a raid. Next up we have Molt. When activated, Saryn will strip away her skin like a snake, which will draw enemy fire for a really short period of time. I mean, it's just a shell made of dead skin. I don't really know what I was expecting. But it is cheap, and it does buy you a bit of time when you need it. The best part about this ability, though, is the absence of a casting animation, so when you need a decoy, you hit 2, and without breaking stride, a copy is left behind to be devoured. And if you have energy to burn, you could always try and see what kind of dead skin sculpture art you come up with. I've spent way too much time playing with this thing, to be honest. But overall, it's a handy ability to have. Here's another interesting mechanic. Saryn casts Contagion and charges her weapon to do poison damage on top of the standard weapon damage. The effect is so interesting that no one has really sat down to figure out how much damage it does, but don't worry, I have, and it's not a lot. On the Fang, for example, it adds 9 damage for standard melee, and on the Skindo, it does about 33. So it does change the weapon type and attack type such as charge versus standard melee, but it won't scale with mods, and therefore it won't scale enough to be useful beyond a certain point. What I will say is using a fast weapon will certainly yield the best results, and using this ability while leveling will most definitely be useful. And I guess stacking it with the Myers passive poison mechanic would probably actually make it completely viable, so if you own one, give it a shot. Miasma, Saryn's fourth and final ability, is simple. Hit 4, vaporize everything. That's it. Doesn't even show damage numbers, which I've heard also impacts your stats, something hopefully will get fixed soon. But honestly, if it wasn't for the poor range associated with this skill, I'd have to crown it the king of all ultimates. Now, supposedly it pulses every second for up to 4 seconds, but every time you use this, it just reduces mobs to swirling green, so really, who's counting? I have, however, found its threshold in terms of damage where I wasn't able to one-shot light armored enemies over level 45 or so. Again, we're only having this discussion because we can't see numbers. Now, the unfortunate thing is that this ability does not make you invincible while being cast, but it does stun enemies within the skill's reach. Regardless, it does have a pretty quick turnaround and even activates smoothly when you're parkouring off of things, whereas most abilities would jerk the character to a halt when casting. What can I say? Finesse is everything. Now, overall, Saryn is a pretty good frame, but if the damage output on Contagion scaled just a little bit better, then we might actually have a frame where almost every ability can be used in nearly every situation. But the biggest hurdle for most players will be dealing with the tediousness of Venom, where players want to just cast and have damage numbers bursting out of the screen. This ability actually requires a little bit more work to make pay off. But seriously, even though it's not going to be one-shotting level 40 Grenier, the mid-20s DPS that you can easily keep up by casting Venom back-to-back means that there's no excuse to not keep this rolling on Ancients, Commanders, the Hyena, Jackal, Captain Boar, Cthulhu, Twin M's, Kel'Thuzad, the Four Horsemen, Arthas, Deathwing,